these false substitutes and intentionally seeking God's presence and purposes. It requires a shift from external to internal focus, from what we have or get to who we are becoming in Christ. This shift involves daily decisions, choosing gratitude over complaint, faith over fear, obedience over rebellion, and love over selfishness. Choosing temporary pleasures over eternal satisfaction also distracts us from God's best for our lives. It clouds our vision, making it difficult to see the path of purpose and meaning God has prepared. Instead of growing in faith and character, we become shallow, caught in cycles of indulgence and regret. Don't settle for the fleeting. Choose the eternal. Your soul was made for more than passing pleasures. It was made for the lasting joy that only God can provide. When your sense of worth depends on the approval and recognition of others, you build your identity on a shaky foundation that will never support you through life's storms. People-pleasing and seeking validation from the world can become an exhausting treadmill where the finish line keeps moving farther away. This constant chase leaves you vulnerable to insecurity, fear, and disappointment because human approval is fickle and unreliable. Freedom from materialism leads to spiritual clarity. You begin to see God's hand in your life more clearly and develop a heart that values eternal things over temporary gain. You cultivate a generosity that blesses others and reflects God's love. Furthermore, materialism breeds anxiety and dissatisfaction. The pursuit of more never truly ends because there is always something bigger, better, or newer to want. This insatiable appetite can enslave you, causing stress and fear over losing what you have or never having enough. Instead of bringing peace, material possessions often bring worry. Generosity flows naturally from a heart that trusts God to provide. When you believe that God will meet your needs, you can give freely without fear or hesitation. This generosity reflects God's own character and blesses others, creating a cycle of blessing that extends far beyond your own life. God created us with a hunger, an unquenchable thirst that no earthly possession, achievement, or relationship can fully satisfy. When we chase after these temporary things, we ignore the one source that can fill us completely, God Himself. This speech will uncover 6 vital truths that reveal why chasing after what cannot satisfy will always leave you empty and how turning to God brings true fulfillment. There is a profound emptiness that every human being carries deep within, a void that no amount of money, success, or pleasure can ever fill. This is not a flaw or a mistake. Rather, it is a divine design. God created our hearts with a special space reserved only for Him. A space that longs for something eternal, something infinite. When we try to fill this God-shaped hole with the things of this world, we inevitably come up empty. God's provision is not always what we expect or desire in the moment, but it is always what we need for our growth and well-being. Sometimes He provides abundance. Other times He teaches contentment in less. Both seasons are essential to developing character, faith, and reliance on Him. God's Word encourages us to delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 37:4. This verse reveals a profound principle. When your heart finds joy in God, your desires align with His will and true satisfaction follows. It is not about chasing after desires, but allowing God to shape and fulfill them. However, God offers a joy that is far deeper and more enduring than any temporary pleasure. This joy comes from knowing Him and walking in His ways. It is a joy that circumstances cannot steal, a peace that calms the restless heart. However, there is hope. God invites you to break free from the chains of materialism by reorienting your heart and mind toward Him. When you put God first and seek His kingdom, He promises to provide for your needs. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. This doesn't mean abandoning possessions or wealth, but holding them loosely, recognizing they are tools, not treasures. If you find yourself trapped in the pursuit of material things, remember that true satisfaction cannot be bought or earned. It comes only from a vibrant relationship with God, whose riches are beyond measure. Shift your gaze from the temporary to the eternal, and you will experience the joy and peace that materialism can never provide. When we learn to trust in God's provision, we step into a peace that the world cannot understand. Life is filled with uncertainties, and the temptation to rely on our own strength, resources, or plans is strong. But God calls us to a different way, one of faith and dependence on Him, trusting that He will provide what we need when we need it. It is important to recognize this truth not as condemnation, but as clarity. Understanding that the void exists and that earthly things cannot fill it is the first step toward true freedom. Instead of continuing a fruitless chase, we are invited to turn our hearts toward the only one who can satisfy. Living with your identity rooted in God also helps you endure criticism and rejection without losing heart. You understand that human opinions are limited and that ultimate judgment belongs to God alone. This perspective strengthens your resilience and peace. Many people struggle with anxiety and worry because they try to control their circumstances rather than trusting God's timing and supply. They look at the scarcity, the obstacles, and the unknown, and their faith begins to falter. Yet God invites us to cast our cares on Him because He cares deeply for us. 1 Peter 5:7. When you release your worries to God, you experience a peace that guards your heart and mind. Materialism also affects how you relate to others. When your focus is on accumulating wealth, you may become selfish, greedy, or indifferent to the needs of those around you. This contradicts the heart of God's kingdom, which calls us to generosity, compassion, and selflessness. Materialism blinds you to the spiritual realities that matter most. It narrows your focus to what is seen and tangible, ignoring the unseen kingdom of God. This spiritual blindness can make you forget that life is more than food, drink, and possessions. Jesus warned us not to store up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, Matthew 6:19, but to seek treasures in heaven. When you chase after material wealth, you risk losing sight of eternal values, love, faith, kindness, and justice. Moreover, when you choose satisfaction, your life becomes a testimony to others. People around you notice the peace and contentment that defies circumstances. Your life points others toward the source of true satisfaction, God Himself. One of the greatest barriers to choosing satisfaction is the tendency to settle for less than what God intends. This happens when we conform to the world's definition of success, happiness, or fulfillment. We might settle for temporary pleasures, human approval, or material gain because they seem easier or quicker to obtain. But these substitutes always fall short, leaving us restless. People often look around and see others chasing after wealth, fame, or relationships, assuming that those achievements must bring satisfaction. But the truth is, even the richest, most famous, or most loved individuals can feel hollow inside. The possessions, accolades, and approval of others provide only a temporary fix, like putting a bandage on a wound that needs deep healing. These things do not address the root of our longing. Pleasure, by its very nature, is temporary. It is designed to be a momentary taste of joy, not a lifelong source of satisfaction. When we build our lives around these fleeting pleasures, we set ourselves up for disappointment. We chase one high after another, always hoping the next will finally fill the void, but the void remains. Remember, you were created to be approved by God, not by people. Your true value is fixed in His unwavering love and faithfulness. When you embrace this truth, you stop chasing approval that cannot satisfy and start living in the freedom of your God-given identity. So if you find yourself chasing after things that leave you restless and empty, know that this hunger is a divine invitation. It is God calling you to stop running in circles and start running toward Him. Only He can fill the God-shaped hole in your heart and satisfy the deepest longings of your soul. Before you come to Him, you will discover the true satisfaction your heart was made to receive. Temporary pleasures promise a quick fix, a burst of happiness that lights up the moment but fades all too soon. We live in a culture that constantly advertises the next best thing, the newest gadget, the latest trend, the most exciting experience. These things tempt us with instant gratification, whispering that they will bring fulfillment. Yet, time and again, they prove to be fleeting, leaving us hungry for more. So let go of anxiety and embrace faith. Choose to trust God with your needs, your future, and your life. When you do, you will experience the peace and satisfaction that only He can give. God's provision sustains you, satisfies you, and secures you in a world that constantly changes. That is the promise and the power of placing your trust in Him. The pursuit of true satisfaction requires intentional choices, decisions that align your life with God's purpose rather than fleeting desire. Many people drift through life, swept along by circumstances or impulses, chasing after whatever momentarily grabs their attention. This reactive living keeps them stuck in a cycle of dissatisfaction because they never pause to consider what truly satisfies the soul. Spiritually, materialism can harden your heart. When possessions become your security, you forget to trust God fully. Your reliance shifts from God's provision to your own resources. This can stunt your faith and growth because trust is foundational to your relationship with God. The more you depend on things, the less you depend on God. Stop trying to mold yourself to fit the ever-changing expectations of the world. Instead, stand firm on the unchanging truth of who God says you are. Your worth is not in the eyes of man, but in the heart of God. And that alone is enough to satisfy your soul. Materialism is one of the most deceptive traps that can ensnare the human heart. It promises happiness, security, and fulfillment through the accumulation of possessions and wealth, but in reality it leads to bondage and spiritual blindness. When you place your hope and trust in material things, you begin to worship what God created rather than God Himself. This misplaced devotion causes a disconnect from the very source of true life and satisfaction. The Bible reminds us that seeking approval from God is what truly matters. It says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." Galatians 1:10. This verse calls us to shift our focus from pleasing others to pleasing God, a pursuit that brings true freedom and fulfillment. The Bible speaks of this reality clearly. It warns against being lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. 2 Timothy 3:4. This means that when pleasure becomes our priority, it pushes God and his purposes to the sidelines. We become prisoners to momentary feelings, neglecting the eternal satisfaction that God offers. The danger is not the pleasure itself, but the misplaced trust in it. Pleasure is a gift from God when experienced in the right context and balance. But when we place our hope and happiness in it, it becomes a false god. Like a mirage in a desert, it promises refreshment, but leaves us parched. The danger of chasing approval is that it distracts you from the truth of who God says you are. Your true worth is not determined by how many likes you get, how much money you make, or how many people applaud your efforts. Your worth is found in God's unconditional love for you. He sees you as his masterpiece, created with purpose and intentionality. The process of choosing satisfaction is ongoing. It requires daily commitment and awareness. It means being intentional about where you invest your time, energy, and heart. It means constantly evaluating what you chase and whether it brings lasting fulfillment. The story of Elijah and the widow in 1 Kings 17 beautifully illustrates God's faithful provision. In a time of famine, God provided miraculously through a seemingly impossible source. The widow's jar of flour and jug of oil did not run dry because she trusted God's promise through Elijah. This teaches us that God's provision can come through unexpected means when we place our trust in him. The world around us is quick to judge, slow to encourage, and often inconsistent in its praise. One moment you may feel on top of the world, basking in the glow of applause or admiration, and the next you are forgotten or criticized. When your identity is tied to these shifting opinions, your emotions become a roller coaster, unstable and unpredictable. This leaves little room for true peace or confidence. This cycle of temporary pleasure leads to what the world calls more, but what the soul knows as emptiness. The more we indulge, the more we realize we are still empty. This emptiness isn't a sign that we need more pleasure. It's a sign that we need the right kind of satisfaction, a satisfaction that only God can provide. This does not mean that God forbids success, relationships, or comfort, but rather that these things are never meant to be the source of our satisfaction. They are blessings that flow from a heart that already knows true fulfillment in God. When God fills the void, these earthly things take their proper place as gifts, not as idols. This hunger within the human heart is not just for physical needs, like food, shelter, or comfort, but for spiritual fulfillment. It is a craving for meaning, purpose, connection, and love that transcends the material world. When we ignore this spiritual need and focus solely on external things, we miss the very source designed to satisfy us fully. This journey is not always easy. It involves self-discipline, perseverance, and sometimes sacrifice. It means saying no to things that promise pleasure but lead to emptiness. It means prioritizing time with God, cultivating spiritual disciplines, and surrounding yourself with influences that encourage growth. It also means trusting God's timing, even when satisfaction feels distant. This pattern is a cycle that ensnares many. After the excitement wears off, boredom or dissatisfaction creeps in, and we rush to find the next thrill. The problem is that nothing in this world is capable of permanently quenching our deepest desires. The things that bring temporary pleasure can never replace the lasting peace and contentment that come from a deeper source. Trusting God also involves patience. Often his timing differs from ours. Waiting can be hard, but it is a vital part of growing in faith. Patience teaches us to rely not on our own schedule, but on God's perfect plan. In those waiting seasons, God is working, preparing, and providing in ways we cannot yet see. Trusting God's provision does not mean sitting back passively and expecting everything to fall into place. It means actively partnering with God, working diligently and making wise decisions while resting in the confidence that He is the ultimate provider. This balance between action and faith is where true peace is found. Ultimately, choosing satisfaction is about embracing God's plan for your life. It is a choice to live fully with purpose and peace, regardless of the world's noise or distractions. When you make this choice, you unlock a life that is truly abundant, a life where satisfaction is not fleeting but eternal. Your soul was created for this. Choose it today and experience the fullness of God's satisfaction. Ultimately, trusting God's provision anchors you in hope. It means that no matter what comes your way, whether scarcity, uncertainty, or abundance, you can rest in the knowledge that God is with you. His provision is a demonstration of His love and faithfulness. When we look at the world around us, we see a relentless pursuit, people chasing after success, money, pleasure, recognition, and comfort. But the question we must ask ourselves today is, are these things truly satisfying your soul? Or are you running on a treadmill, exhausted and still empty? The truth is, many are caught in the trap of chasing things that simply cannot satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart. When we seek God, we find a satisfaction unlike any other. He is the living water that quenches thirst forever. He is the bread of life that fills the soul completely. When our hearts rest in Him, the emptiness is replaced with peace, joy, and contentment that no one and nothing else can provide. When we try to substitute anything else, whether it's money, success, pleasure, or approval, we are like someone trying to quench their thirst with salt water. Instead of being refreshed, we become more parched. The more we chase, the emptier we feel. This is the tragedy of life without God, the pursuit of satisfaction in all the wrong places. When you begin to anchor your identity in God's love and acceptance, you gain a new level of confidence and stability. You no longer need the constant approval of others because you know you are already accepted and valued. This liberates you to live boldly, speak truthfully, and walk in your God-given purpose. When you build your identity on human approval, you also limit your potential. Fear of rejection can prevent you from stepping out in faith, taking risks, or standing firm in your convictions. You become a slave to pleasing others rather than a servant of God. This compromises your authenticity and